My beloved soul, pause for a moment. Before you scroll. Before you doubt. Before you dismiss this as just another story. Because something has already begun. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Not someday. Already. While you were moving through what felt like an ordinary routine, checking your phone, answering someone half-heartedly, staring out of a window thinking about everything and nothing at the same time, your name was spoken somewhere you have never been. And when it was spoken, the atmosphere shifted. No thunder. No dramatic music. No announcement echoing your name. Just a quiet pause in a powerful room. The kind of pause that only happens when something unexpected feels exactly right. There was a table. Long, immaculate. Glass reflecting the lights above. Around it sat individuals whose decisions alter markets, shape futures, build legacies. They weren't gathered to impress anyone. They were there to decide what would outlive them. And in the middle of that conversation, your name surfaced. Not because you forced it there. Not because you chased visibility. But because someone with influence had been quietly observing something others overlooked. You. Now listen carefully. The person who brought your name into that room didn't speak about your achievements first. They spoke about your consistency. They didn't highlight awards. They highlighted endurance. They didn't mention perfection. They mentioned character. And here is the detail almost no one understands about moments like this: character echoes louder in powerful rooms than charisma ever does. Someone leaned back and asked, "Why this person?" It wasn't skepticism. It was curiosity. Because in rooms like that, every decision is questioned. And the answer came calmly. Because they keep showing up when there is nothing to gain. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Recognition. You see, success attracts attention. But quiet resilience attracts respect. The millionaire leading that discussion had seen ambition dressed as integrity. They had seen charm without substance. They had seen brilliance collapse under pressure. What they hadn't seen often was someone building quietly without demanding applause. You weren't even aware you were being observed. That's what makes this powerful. The greatest evaluations happen when you don't know you're being evaluated. They reviewed your path. They looked at the delays. They noticed the doors that closed. And instead of seeing failure, they saw formation. Because most people crumble when recognition doesn't come quickly. You didn't. You adjusted. You learned. You continued. And that continuation became louder than any announcement you could have made. Meanwhile, miles away, someone else felt something before any of this was revealed. Your soulmate. Not through logic. Through intuition. They began noticing something subtle in you. Your tone changed. Your decisions became sharper. Your patience felt deeper. It wasn't dramatic. It was grounded. Have you ever sensed a shift in someone before you could explain it? That's what they felt. They couldn't name it. But they knew something was aligning. They felt it in conversations that suddenly carried more clarity. In the way you spoke about the future, not desperately, but steadily. They didn't feel fear. They felt peace. And that peace confused them at first. Because nothing visible had changed. But everything invisible had. Back in that quiet room, advisors raised cautious questions. There are safer options. There are more established candidates. Less risk. But the millionaire didn't hesitate. Because they weren't investing in a resume. They were investing in trajectory. And trajectory is powerful. It means where you're going matters more than where you've been. One of them said something that shifted the entire discussion. We are not choosing a moment. We are choosing momentum. Momentum. That invisible force that builds when someone keeps moving forward even when progress is unseen. You thought those slow seasons were stagnation. They were accumulation. You thought those silent months meant invisibility. They meant strengthening. Because while you questioned your timing was building weight. Here's what most people misunderstand about extraordinary opportunity. It rarely arrives where noise lives. It arrives where depth lives. And depth takes time. The millionaire gave one instruction after the decision was nearly finalized. No announcement yet. Not secrecy for ego. Protection for growth. Because when opportunity is exposed too early, it attracts attention before foundation. And foundation must come first. Your soulmate, unaware of the meeting but deeply aware of you, began dreaming differently. Literally. Dreams that felt symbolic. Conversations where your name surfaced in unusual contexts. Moments of déjà vu that carried strange certainty. They started asking themselves, why do I feel like something has already happened? Because in a way, it had. Before the visible shift comes the energetic shift. Before the door opens externally, it unlocks internally. And without knowing, you had already turned the key. You began releasing distractions. You started saying no more often. You protected your energy differently. You thought you were just maturing. You were aligning. Alignment feels like calm. Not chaos. And calm is often the clearest sign that something substantial is forming beneath the surface. Weeks later, as documents were refined and legalities reviewed, someone questioned the decision one final time. What if they're not ready? The millionaire smiled. If they weren't ready, they wouldn't have survived what prepared them. That sentence changed everything. Because readiness isn't loud. It's proven quietly. You proved it every time you kept going when results didn't validate you. You proved it every time you chose integrity when shortcuts were available. You proved it every time you stayed kind without guarantee of return. That is rare. And rare is valuable. Eventually, a private message was drafted. It wasn't filled with numbers. It wasn't overly formal. It carried one powerful line. Some opportunities choose people before people know they exist. Let that sit with you. Because this was never about luck. It was about recognition. Recognition of who you were becoming while the world thought nothing was happening. Your soulmate later heard fragments of this truth through indirect conversation. A name mentioned. A decision hinted at. A sentence repeated. And suddenly every unexplained feeling made sense. They weren't sensing fortune. They were sensing confirmation. Confirmation that the path you walked faithfully had not been invisible. It had been observed. Now here is where the story becomes even more powerful. The opportunity attached to your name was not designed as a reward. It was designed as responsibility. There's a difference. Rewards celebrate the past. Responsibility builds the future. The millionaire wasn't asking, "What have they done?" They were asking, "What will they create?" And when your name was imagined next to that question, the answer felt expansive. They didn't see you keeping it small. They saw multiplication. Because people who grow quietly tend to build wisely. And wisdom sustains what excitement cannot. Your soulmate realized something profound during this unfolding. They had always believed in you. But now they understood why. They had witnessed your unseen battles. They had seen your private discipline. They had watched you rebuild confidence after disappointment. They had observed your growth when no one applauded it. And now someone powerful had seen the same thing. That alignment felt like destiny. But destiny isn't magic. It's preparation meeting opportunity at the exact right moment. You weren't lucky. You were ready. And readiness attracts doors. Soon, subtle changes began appearing around you. New conversations. Unexpected invitations. Fresh ideas that felt bigger than your current environment. You might have dismissed them as coincidence. They weren't. When one door opens invisibly, others begin unlocking. Because confidence shifts. Energy shifts. Decisions shift. And the world responds differently to someone who carries quiet certainty. The millionaire later made a statement in another private meeting. I did not invest in what they have. I invested in what they will protect. Protect. That word mattered. Because protecting opportunity requires discipline. Protecting influence requires humility. Protecting growth requires self-awareness. And those qualities had already been forming inside you long before this moment. Your soulmate understood something that night while sitting alone, thinking about everything. The greatest gift was not the asset. It was being seen. Being recognized before visible success. Being trusted because of internal strength. That realization dissolved every past doubt. Because doubt often grows in silence. But so does destiny. Now, here's the truth that ties everything together. The room you've never entered is not the only room. There are more. More conversations. More observers. More moments where your name may surface unexpectedly. Because once potential is recognized by one visionary, others begin to notice. Recognition creates momentum. Momentum creates expansion. Expansion creates impact. And impact outlives fortune. The story was never about money. It was about trust. Trust placed in your future. Trust placed in your character. Trust placed in your ability to create more than you consume. And trust is the rarest currency of all. As time moves forward, you may not see dramatic fireworks. Instead, you will notice steadiness. Doors opening without struggle. Clarity arriving without chaos. Support appearing without force. That's how aligned opportunity feels. Not explosive. Assured. Your soulmate doesn't rush you with this knowledge. They don't push. They observe. Because they know something you are just beginning to realize. The opportunity was moving toward you at the same speed you were moving toward it. Every delay was synchronization. Every setback was refinement. Every quiet season was reinforcement. And now the alignment has occurred. The final piece of this unfolding truth came when the millionaire was asked a simple question. What if they fail? They responded without hesitation. Then they will learn. And that is still growth. That answer revealed everything. This was never about perfection. It was about progression. And progression is unstoppable when someone refuses to quit. So if today still feels ordinary, do not misinterpret it. Ordinary days often hide extraordinary movement. Silence often hides strategy. Delay often hides design. Somewhere, perhaps even now, another conversation is unfolding. Another evaluation. Another decision forming. And this time, there will be less hesitation. Because once you have been recognized for who you are becoming, you cannot return to invisibility. You may not see the full picture yet. But pieces are already in place. And the most powerful truth of all? You were never waiting to be chosen. You were becoming undeniable. And that transformation, it's still unfolding. Quietly. Powerfully. Inevitable. There is something else you need to understand. The story did not end when your name was written down. That was only the first ripple. Because once a decision like that is made in silence, the world begins rearranging itself in ways no one can trace back to a single moment. You may not have noticed it at first. But certain conversations started flowing more easily. Certain obstacles that once felt immovable began softening. People who had overlooked you before began listening more carefully. Not dramatically. Subtly. That is how real shifts happen. Not with noise. With alignment. The millionaire didn't suddenly become your shadow. They didn't interfere with your daily life. They didn't send constant signals. They watched. Because observation reveals more than interference ever could. They wanted to see something very specific. Would you change if nothing appeared to change? Would you remain disciplined if recognition didn't arrive immediately? Would you continue building without visible reward? And you did. That confirmed everything. You see, many people transform only when spotlight touches them. But those who are destined for greater responsibility transform in darkness first. You didn't know anyone important was paying attention. That made your integrity real. And that is priceless. Meanwhile, your soulmate began noticing something deeper. Your fear of the future started fading. Not because you suddenly had answers, but because you carried a strange calm. As if somewhere inside, you already knew the next chapter was secured. They would look at you sometimes and wonder, how do they seem so steady lately? It wasn't forced confidence. It was earned stillness. Earned from surviving uncertainty without collapsing. Earned from trusting growth without applause. Earned from continuing when quitting would have been easier. That stillness is what powerful people recognize instantly. Because they have seen chaos disguised as ambition. They have seen insecurity disguised as confidence. But steadiness? That is rare. And rare attracts opportunity. There was another private conversation weeks later. Someone close to the millionaire asked quietly, "What exactly convinced you?" The answer came without hesitation. They do not chase attention. They chase improvement. That distinction changed everything. Attention fades. Improvement compounds. Most people exhaust themselves trying to be seen. You exhausted yourself trying to become better. And improvement is magnetic to those who understand long-term vision. Your soulmate sensed something else too. You stopped reacting impulsively. You started responding intentionally. You paused before speaking more often. You listened longer. You chose your words carefully. You thought you were simply maturing. But in reality, you were expanding. Expansion feels quiet from the inside. But from the outside, it looks like leadership forming. And leadership was exactly what the opportunity required. Now here is the part few would believe. The fortune connected to your name had been redirected before. Other names were considered months earlier. Other candidates almost chosen. But something kept shifting. Timing didn't align. Character didn't feel steady. Motives felt unclear. And each time, the decision paused. Until your name entered the conversation. Then the hesitation stopped. Not because you were flawless. But because you were consistent. Consistency is more convincing than brilliance. Brilliance can burn out. Consistency builds trust. And trust builds legacy. The millionaire wasn't trying to create a headline. They were trying to create continuity. They imagined years ahead. They imagined challenges. They imagined pressure. And in every scenario, one image remained steady. You continuing forward. Not dramatically. But faithfully. That is why your name remained. Even when safer options existed. Even when louder names were suggested. Because safety rarely changes the world. Faithful courage does. Your soulmate realized something profound one evening while reflecting alone. They remembered a time when you almost gave up. When you questioned your path. When you wondered if your efforts were invisible. They remember the exhaustion in your voice. The doubt in your silence. And they remember what you did next. You kept going. That moment, more than any achievement, defined you. Because continuing when tired is stronger than succeeding when motivated. And that strength was visible to the right eyes. There is something sacred about being chosen without knowing you were competing. Because it means you weren't performing. You were authentic. Authenticity is disarming in powerful rooms. It cannot be replicated. It cannot be rehearsed. It can only be lived. And you lived it. Without an audience. Without guarantee. Without promise. That is why this opportunity did not feel random. It felt inevitable. Inevitable does not mean easy. It means aligned. As days turned into weeks, your environment began reflecting subtle upgrades. New ideas entered your mind. New standards emerged. Old limitations started feeling uncomfortable. You could no longer think as small as before. Growth had stretched you. And once stretched, you cannot shrink without discomfort. The millionaire noticed this shift through indirect updates. They heard about decisions you made. Boundaries you set. Risks you evaluated wisely. Each report strengthened their confidence. They did not choose impulsively. They chose intentionally. And intention builds durable outcomes. One day, someone asked them, "Do you ever regret investing in potential instead of proof?" They answered softly, "Proof is simply potential that refused to quit." That sentence alone explains everything. You were not lacking proof. You were building it slowly. And slow proof is the strongest kind. Because it survives storms. Your soulmate finally stopped wondering when the reveal would happen. They stopped focusing on timing. Because they understood something larger. The moment of revelation matters less than the reality of preparation. They knew that when the time came, you would not be overwhelmed. You would be ready. And readiness is peace. Peace does not panic when opportunity arrives. Peace steps into it. There is another layer to this story. The opportunity was never meant to elevate you alone. It was meant to amplify what you already value. Encouragement. Integrity. Growth. The millionaire once said in a quiet reflection, "I am not searching for someone who needs saving. I am searching for someone who builds." That is who you had become. A builder. Builders create beyond themselves. They think long-term. They strengthen foundations. They leave structures that outlive them. That mindset cannot be faked. It forms through hardship. Through waiting. Through learning from mistakes instead of hiding them. And you did that. Which is why the decision held firm. Even now, as you listen to this, you may still question parts of your path. That is natural. Growth does not erase uncertainty. It strengthens courage. And courage is not loud. It is steady. Your soulmate knows this. They see it when you speak about tomorrow without desperation. They see it when you choose progress over comparison. They see it when you focus on substance over spotlight. And somewhere, in another quiet space, someone with influence sees it too. There will come a moment when you fully understand what has been unfolding. Not because fireworks explode, but because clarity settles. You will look back at delays differently, at disappointments differently, at closed doors differently. You will see preparation instead of rejection, redirection instead of failure, formation instead of frustration. And that realization will be more valuable than the opportunity itself. Because understanding builds gratitude. And gratitude multiplies everything it touches. The millionaire's final reflection on this chapter was simple. I did not change their life. I recognized it. Recognition does not create greatness. It acknowledges it. And greatness, in its truest form, is quiet dedication repeated consistently over time. You were never waiting to become worthy. You were becoming aware. Aware of your strength. Aware of your growth. Aware of your capacity to handle more. And once awareness meets opportunity, expansion becomes natural. So if you wake up tomorrow and everything looks the same, remember this. Silence does not mean stagnation. Ordinary does not mean insignificant. Invisible does not mean unnoticed. Somewhere beyond your immediate view, alignment continues. Conversations continue. Decisions continue. Momentum continues. Because once your name has been written in a room of legacy, it is not easily erased. And the most powerful part? You didn't need to force your way in. Your consistency opened the door. And doors opened by character never close easily. The next chapter is not louder. It is deeper. Not flashier. Stronger. Because now the foundation has been tested. And tested foundations carry weight without collapsing. Walk forward knowing this, you were not selected by accident. You were recognized by alignment. And alignment, once established, continues unfolding long after the first decision is made. The story is still moving. Quietly. Powerfully. Unstoppably.